Good morning, everyone. Grandpa Ron here again. I hope you're all well and happy today. We're going to get back into our very basic Bible study by looking at chapter 17 of Genesis. We've been looking at the life of Abram and how he trusted God and believed in God, and even though he was an imperfect man, a sinful man, he'd made mistakes. Because of his trust and faith in God, God reckoned that to him as righteousness. And God has made some promises to him. God has promised that he is going to have a multitude of descendants, and he used analogies like the number of grains of sand on the seashore and the number of stars in the heavens. And he also promised him land, the promised land, as we know it. I'll refer to it. And but the only heir, the only descendant of Abram so far is Ishmael, who was born to Hagar, who was a maidservant that came with them out of Egypt when they traveled there. So God in chapter 17 is going to get more specific in his promises. So let's see what he says. Chapter 17, verse 1. Now when Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, now he's 99 years old. Now this is 13 years after Ishmael had been born. So Ishmael's now 13. And God said to Abram, I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless. And I will establish my covenant between me and you, and I will multiply you exceedingly. And Abram fell on his face, and God talked with him, saying, As for me, behold, my covenant is with you, and you shall be the father of a multitude of nations. No longer shall your name be called Abram, but your name shall be Abraham. For I will make you the father of a multitude of nations. So God is going to restate this contract, this promise to Abram, and he's changed his name to Abraham. Now Abraham, you recall, meant something like exalted father. But now God has changed his name to Abraham, which means the father of many, the father of many, the father of a great number. And we're going to see that God reiterates this promise that he's going to make him the father of a great number of peoples. But now Abram's got to go to his family and all of his workers and everything and explain to them that his name's been changed. And yet he only has the one son through Hagar so far. So let's see what happens. Verse 7. And I will establish my covenant between me and you and your descendants after you throughout their generations for an everlasting covenant, to be God to you and to your descendants after you. So God is basically saying, I'm going to enter into a contract with you, a one-sided contract. I want to make you some promises, and it's going to be an everlasting covenant. It's going to last forever. Okay? And he's going to be a God to them and to his descendants, to Abraham's descendants. Okay, verse 8. And I will give to you and to your descendants after you the land of your sojournings, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. So all these places that Abraham's been wandering around, and God has listed it before, all the different areas, God's promised to Abraham. Verse 9, God said further to Abraham, Now as for you, you shall keep my covenant, you and your descendants after you throughout their generations. And so there's going to be a requirement on Abraham's part. Verse 10, this is my covenant which you shall keep between me and you and your descendants after you. Every male among you shall be circumcised, and you shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskin, and that shall be the sign of a covenant between me and you. And every male among you who is 8 days old shall be circumcised throughout your generations. A servant who is born in the house, or who is bought with money from any foreigner who is not of your descendants. And he goes on, verse 13. A servant who is born in your house, or who is bought with your money, shall surely be circumcised. Thus shall my covenant be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant. But an uncircumcised male who is not circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin, that person shall be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant. Now, there were other nations that practiced circumcision, but not to this extent, and not with a religious connotation to it. And this is a outward manifestation of something that God expects for Abram and his people to experience inwardly, and that is a heart circumcision. And I won't go into all the verses now, but there are other verses from prophets in the Old Testament, and there are verses from the New Testament that talks about a circumcised heart. And so this is symbolic of a change inwardly, a circumcised heart, removing unnecessary hindrances to the heart, exposing man's heart to God in honesty and forthrightness. And that's the circumcision that God really looks for. This physical circumcision is symbolic of that, but he's requiring it of everyone so that this symbolism is pervasive throughout Abraham and his descendants as a testimony of this covenant with God. But what God is really looking for is a change in heart, a circumcised heart. So let's continue on with verse 16. No, let's go to verse 15, I'm sorry. Then God said to Abraham, as for Sarai, your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. And I will bless her, and indeed will give you a son by her. Then I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations. Kings of people shall come from her. Now, this is the first time that God has mentioned that Sarai is going to be the mother of these descendants of Abram. As you remember, Sarai had given Abram her handmaiden, Hagar, to have a son because Sarai was barren. And so this was acceptable in those days, but they kind of intervened. And even though God had promised a son, he didn't say through whom yet. And so they were kind of helping God along the way, like we do sometimes. And so they had the son Ishmael. But now God is saying, no, Sarai, you're going to have a son. And that's going to start a chain of descendants of many peoples and nations. So even though Sarai was older, God is going to perform a miraculous work in her life so that she can bear children. Verse 17, then Abraham fell on his face and laughed and said in his heart, will a child be born to a man 100 years old? And will Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child? And Abraham said to God, oh, that Ishmael might live before thee. It was kind of like, remember we said Abram wasn't perfect, and he's saying, this is nice of you, God, to promise this, but, you know, we both know this is kind of out of the realm of possibility, so why not turn Ishmael's heart to you and let him live before you, and he would be the descendant you promise. So there's a little skepticism on Abraham's part there, apparently, the way I read this. Verse 19, but God said, no, but Sarah your wife shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac, and I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him. So God is saying, oh no, Abraham, I meant what I said. Sarah is going to have a son. It's going to be your descendant. And you need to believe that. You need to trust that. And verse 20, and as for Ishmael, I have heard you. I will bless him, and I will make him fruitful, and will multiply him exceedingly. He shall become the father of 12 princes, and I will make him a great nation. So, God earlier had promised Abram, before his name was changed to Abraham, he had promised him long before that he was going to be the father of a multitude of nations. And so Ishmael is a part of this. He's going to have sons too. He's going to have descendants too. But as we saw in an earlier chapter, there's going to be conflict between Ishmael's descendants and Isaac's descendants. That's already been set up. We can see God has told us that this is going to happen. But as part of his promise to make Abraham a father of many nations, Ishmael is also going to be blessed in that regard. Verse 21, but my covenant I will establish with Isaac, whom Sarah will bear to you at this season next year. Boy, he even gets specific as to when it's going to happen. And when he finished talking with him, God went up from Abraham. So this interaction between God and Abraham, very striking, very miraculous in nature. And God is making it very clear what's going to happen, and very clear what his will is, and making it very clear what this covenant is going to entail. Verse 23, then Abraham took Ishmael his son, and all the servants who were born in his house, and all those who were bought with money, every male among the men of Abraham's household, and circumcised the flesh of their foreskin in the very same day as God had said to him. Wow. Just think of the obedience of these people to subject themselves to this. Number one, Abraham was immediately obedient. God said, you've got to do this. And boy, he did it immediately. And all of the people of all the men of his household followed suit. I'm guessing that some, because they were also believers. Surely Abraham had instructed them on his belief and his faith in God, and revealed to them the things that God had revealed to him. So some of them willingly did this. Others out of obligation, because he was their boss. He was their leader. So for a variety of reasons, everybody in his household, according to what God had stated, were circumcised. This was a painful procedure, and it took several days for men to recover from that. the adult males, but they were all circumcised in their flesh. Verse 24, now Abraham was 99 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. And Ishmael his son was 13 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. In the very same day, Abraham was circumcised, and Ishmael his son. So it was all done at the same time. And all of the men of his household who were born in the house or bought with money from a foreigner were circumcised with him. So it's just amazing to see the obedience of Abraham and the obedience of his family and followers, and it's really, really an amazing thing. But God's command has been fulfilled, and he has basically chosen Abraham now, and his descendants as his people, and they are to be an example to the people and nations around them. They have a physical sign, and God wants that spiritual sign, their change of heart, their circumcised heart, a heart that's sensitive to God and loves God. So now we're going to see what transpires after this, and how this chain continues. And we're going to see a lot of turmoil, a lot of things going on from now until Christ's birth, hundreds of years later. Okay, I hope this has been helpful. Hope I didn't muddy the water too much with my aside comments. But we'll pick this up again with chapter 18 next time. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.